The United States, Europe, and many other countries have blanketed Russia with sanctions. Targets include Putin, Foreign Minister Lavrov, other top officials, and many of the oligarchs who have been enriched by Putin and his policies. Many Russian banks have been taken out of SWIFT and thus can no longer complete international transactions. The West has taken a big chunk of Putin's rainy day fund at the Russian central bank, making it inaccessible. The list goes on, but is it enough? Larry Summers joins me now. He was the Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration. Larry, looking at the situation, and if you think of it in terms of a kind of economic war, how are we doing and what should we do?
We're winning. We're doing very well. We have inflicted more damage more quickly with more unity on our side on the Russian economy than almost anyone, I think, would have expected. There's more we can do. There's more that can be done to cut off Russian financial institutions. And of course, critically, there's more that can be done to cut off Russian energy production. And I think we very much need to keep those threats in reserve so as to be able to exercise maximum leverage. Now, the challenge for us is to bring these early successes to some kind of conclusion. And that's a very dangerous and complex thing. But I think one has to give the Biden administration enormous credit for what's been done so far. I think the concept of escalating sanctions over time, never firing your last and most brutal bullet so as to maintain leverage is a very good one. I worry slightly, Fareed, when I hear us protest a bit too vigorously that this isn't going to interfere with gasoline prices too much, because I think ultimately if the price of combating tyranny is a period of much higher gas prices, that's a price we need to be prepared to pay as a country. But I think we'll get there if we need to.
Economic power, economic sanctions rarely have the effect of completely transforming a country's policy or triggering regime change. How should we think about this issue of economic warfare? Can it really make Putin stop what he seems determined to do, which is to take control of all of Ukraine?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody knows. It's doing much more damage, much more quickly than we would have expected. And, you know, Fareed, the other side of what makes this case exceptional is important. Russia is a much more deeply integrated economy into the world than Cuba ever was, or than Iran at the time of the hostages was. And that means that sanctions can do much more to disrupt what was otherwise going on than happened. We've never thought about doing sanctions to a country that had hundreds of billions of dollars in reserves before, and the ability to basically freeze a central bank with hundreds of billions of dollars of reserves is a kind of leverage that we've never thought about having before. So I'm optimistic that this can have very important effects. We may find it necessary or desirable to cut off their ability to export oil and natural gas. But I think the approach that Biden has followed, which is start with the things that do a lot of damage to them and very little damage to us, and over time escalate, I think that has been the right kind of approach.
What about the cost to the global economy and the American economy? President Biden said in his State of the Union that his number one priority was now combating inflation. You've been perhaps more prescient about that inflation than anyone. What is it going to look like if things continue as they are? Will there be more inflation? And is the Biden administration adopting the right strategy to deal with that inflation?
Inflation's a serious problem. This will make it worse. But preserving world order is much more fundamental and much more important than an extra percentage point or an extra 3 percentage point on the CPI over some interval. So let's have our priorities straight. Historians 50 years from now might remember the events of this week in Ukraine. They will not remember the inflation statistics over the next 6 months. I'm an economist, but I'm a political economist, and I recognize what's most fundamentally important.
Larry Summers, good to have you on.
Thank you.